Looking at the map right now, there's a lot happening across a pretty wide stretch of the United States. From the central states all the way over to the East Coast, we're seeing some serious atmospheric activity. And what makes this interesting is that it's not just one thing driving all of this. We've got temperature contrasts, moisture, cloud cover, and wind patterns all working together at the same time. So let's break this down piece by piece and talk about what's actually going on. If we start up north, the first thing that stands out is the cooler air that's still holding its ground. This cold air mass is sitting across the northern tier states, especially in the northwest and the northern plains. And it's not budging easily. It's holding pretty firm right now. We're talking about areas like Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Dakotas, and even into Montana and Wyoming. These regions are locked into this colder pattern, and that air is dense. It's heavy. It doesn't want to move. As we move south from that zone, though, things start to change. The temperatures begin to climb, and we're dealing with much warmer air across the central and southern states. Places like Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and down into Texas are seeing temperatures that are noticeably milder. So right now, we've got two very different air masses sitting side by side, and the zone where they meet is creating a lot of tension in the atmosphere. That transition zone is really active right now. If you're in the Midwest, the Great Plains, or anywhere along the Mississippi Valley, you're right in the middle of this. States like Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana are sitting right on that boundary. The temperature change isn't gradual. In some spots, it's happening over a pretty short distance. You can be in one area where it feels relatively mild, and just 100 miles away, it feels completely different. That tells us the energy balance in the atmosphere is off. When warm and cold air get this close together, the atmosphere doesn't just sit there quietly. It reacts. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. This is the kind of setup where you can have sunshine and mild conditions in one county and then drive an hour north and suddenly you're dealing with overcast skies and a completely different feel to the air. Now let's talk about moisture. This is a big part of the story. We've got humid air masses feeding into the central and eastern regions, and that's setting up areas of precipitation. The moisture is coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, streaming northward and interacting with that temperature contrast we just talked about. If we look at the radar, you'll notice the rain and snow aren't spread out evenly. They're showing up in bands and clusters. Some areas are seeing steady, prolonged precipitation, while others are getting hit with shorter but more intense bursts. That variability is important because it means weather conditions can be pretty calm in one spot and dramatically different just down the road. For example, if you're in central Missouri right now, you might be dealing with steady rain that's been falling for hours. But if you're just over in southern Illinois, you could be seeing breaks in the precipitation with only occasional showers. That's the nature of this setup. It's not uniform, it's patchy, and it's dynamic. Cloud cover is another key piece of this puzzle. Right now, there's a widespread blanket of clouds stretching from the central US all the way to the East Coast. These aren't just thin, scattered clouds either. We're talking about thick, layered systems with the potential for vertical development. That means the atmosphere isn't just sitting still, it's building energy. In a lot of regions, the sun hasn't been able to break through, and that's keeping temperatures from moderating. It's also helping these weather systems stick around longer than they might otherwise. If you're in areas like Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, or the Carolinas, you've probably noticed that the sky has been mostly grey for the past day or two. That's this cloud cover doing its work. And underneath those clouds, the air stays cooler, the winds stay active, and the precipitation continues to develop. Then we've got the winds, and this is where everything starts to connect. Wind is the mechanism that ties all these systems together. In certain areas, we're seeing an increase in wind speed and shifts in wind direction, and that's intensifying the interaction between air masses. The wind is moving precipitation zones around, it's helping cloud systems expand, and it's making conditions more unstable in those transition zones. If you're in the central states, you're probably noticing this wind dynamic pretty clearly. It's not just a light breeze, it's active, and it's playing a big role in how these weather systems evolve. We're seeing southerly winds bringing in that Gulf moisture, while northerly winds are trying to push the cold air southward. That creates a kind of push and pull in the atmosphere, and that's why conditions feel so unsettled. So when you put all of this together, what you get is an atmosphere that's anything but calm. It's not in balance, it's in motion. Temperature differences, moisture, clouds, and wind are all working at the same time. And that creates an environment where more active weather is not just possible, it's likely. Weather events in this kind of setup don't always intensify gradually. Sometimes they come in waves, sometimes they build quietly, and then suddenly become much more noticeable. What we're seeing right now could very well be the early stage of something bigger and more persistent. The atmosphere is primed, the ingredients are in place, and while the exact timing and location of impacts will vary from region to region, the overall trend is clear. We're in an active phase and the atmosphere is ready to respond. For those of you in the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, or the Mid-Atlantic, you're in a zone where these processes are going to be especially noticeable over the next few days. The contrast between the cold air to the north and the warmer air to the south is going to keep this region active. You might see additional rounds of precipitation, possibly in the form of rain, snow, or a mix depending on where you are. Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York are all areas where this could play out. And with the wind staying active, conditions could feel a lot more intense than the numbers on a temperature map might suggest. Wind chills could make it feel colder than the actual temperature, especially if you're north of the transition zone. And if precipitation does develop, the wind could make it feel even more uncomfortable. If you're further south, say in the Gulf Coast states or the southeast, the impacts won't be as direct, but you're still going to feel the edges of this system. Temperatures might fluctuate more than usual. You could see some scattered showers or storms pop up, especially as moisture continues to feed into the region. Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and the Carolinas are all areas where you might see some of this activity. The key takeaway here is that even if you're not in the bullseye, the atmosphere is connected. What happens in one region affects the next. A shift in the wind pattern in the central states can change how moisture flows into the southeast. A change in cloud cover over the Midwest can alter temperatures downstream in the Mid-Atlantic. Out west, things are quieter for now. The ridge that's been sitting over the Rockies and the West Coast is keeping conditions relatively stable there. California, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington are all seeing calmer weather, but it's also part of the reason why the central and eastern US are seeing so much activity. That ridge is blocking weather systems from moving west, which means everything is being funneled toward the east. So while the west gets a break, the rest of the country is dealing with the consequences. It's like a traffic jam in the atmosphere. Systems are backing up and they have nowhere to go except east and south. Looking ahead, this pattern isn't going to flip overnight. The setup we're seeing right now could stick around for a while. That means the potential for additional weather events remains elevated. Some areas might see repeated rounds of precipitation, others might deal with more temperature swings, and in some cases we could see systems intensify as they move through these zones of high atmospheric tension. The next 48 to 72 hours are going to be especially important. If you're planning anything outdoors, if you're traveling, or if you just want to know what to expect, now's the time to pay attention. Things can change fairly quickly in a setup like this. One thing to keep in mind is that in setups like this, timing matters. A system that looks relatively weak on Monday could become much more significant by Wednesday, depending on how these ingredients come together. So if you're in an area where conditions have been quiet recently, don't assume it's going to stay that way. The atmosphere is active and it's capable of changing quickly. We've seen this before where a region thinks they're in the clear and then suddenly conditions deteriorate because one of these systems took a slightly different track or intensified faster than expected. For now, the best approach is to stay aware. Keep an eye on updates, especially if you're in the central or eastern states. Watch for changes in wind, cloud cover, and precipitation patterns. And if you're planning to travel or spend extended time outdoors, just be ready for conditions to shift. Have a backup plan. Check the radar before you head out. And if you're driving, especially through areas like the Great Lakes or the Ohio Valley, be prepared for rapidly changing conditions. Roads could go from dry to wet pretty quickly if a band of precipitation moves through. The big picture here is that the atmosphere is not sitting still. It's moving, it's interacting, and it's setting the stage for more noticeable weather in the days ahead. Whether that means heavy rain, snow, strong winds, or a combination of all three will depend on where you are and how these systems evolve. But one thing is certain. We're in an active phase, and it's worth paying attention to.